So this is really the final step that you'd be considering in the setup of your dimensions, and that's dimension structures. And the key thing to knowing what a dimension structure is as opposed to a dimension group, the key to it is thinking of the word structure. So structure is associated with building, and we're using a dimension structure in building our financial reports. So in our financial reports, when we set those up, there's a type of report called a dimension-based report, and that would be using a dimension structure. There's a couple of areas we'd actually use it, but that's probably the primary one that we would be using it in. When we set up our dimension structure, it's much the same as setting up an account group. You'll see that there's at the top of the dimension structure, there's display on report as and display total line as, marketing and total marketing, and are we using roll-up child amounts or not? That's very similar to the way that we'd have account groups set up and so on. You'll see that underneath that, we go and select the class groups that we want to include in the structure. So we might have multiple class groups that we've set up, and we want to include those in a single structure. And you can set up as many structures as you like to cater for the different types of reports that you may have set up in the system. So switching again to the demo system, I'm going to cancel out of there. We go back to our account groups. So we had our dimension groups, and we've also got our dimension structures. So you saw earlier when I set up my new class dimension called conferences, it automatically added a conferences group into my structure. But in this case, I want this conferences group, let's go and edit this one. I want this to include other class groups as well. So I want to include my accommodation group in here, and I want to include my marketing group in here as well. So now I've got 3 class groups included in here. And if I save that, that'll allow me to include all of those in a single report. If we look at the members of the conferences group, we'll see which classes it is now including in this group. So these are all the different classes that will be associated with that conference structure. When we then go to our financial reports, and I'm going to go back here to financial reports, you'll see that if I go through, I'll just quickly jump into setting up a new report, but I'll come back to one of the ones that I already have set up. When we're initially setting up a report, the report structure is either going to be accounts-based or it's going to be dimensions-based. If it's accounts-based, it's pulling information based on account groups. If it's dimensions-based, it's pulling data based on dimensions. Okay, let's cancel out of that. And first off, let's just show you a normal report. So this is just a standard report that we've set up based on accounts. And if we look at the account groups that we've got set up, I've got one account group set up called operating expenses. That includes all of these other account groups underneath it. So in this case, I'm not looking at anything to do with dimension structures or dimension groups themselves. If I look at the report, it's just a simple report that is showing me all the information. Across the top here, though, you'll see that there are different dimensions set up. So these are coming from our dimension groups. And what I've done, if I go back to my report here, on my columns, I have selected to expand this by all classes. So I'm expanding it by my classes dimension. I'm including all levels with a summary balance. I could say, show me classes 1 level down with roll-up. And that will give me a more concise report because it's only going to show the header level of the data. So now I'm just looking at my events with all classes. So it's very useful in terms of being able to use your dimension groups in splitting up, or your dimensions, I should say, in splitting out your standard reporting. When we go to have a look at our other types of reports, so this particular report here, when I've set it up, I've chosen the same data that I want to use, but this time I've chosen to filter this report based on a dimension structure. So this is the first place that we see dimension structures. So in my setup, I've got the same account group selected, but in this case, I've selected this to filter this by a dimension structure. I'm going to change this dimension structure to choose our new one that we set up, and I'm going to choose conferences group. So, okay, back to my columns. That's okay. So here I've just got the one column for the year. And if I preview this, you'll see now I'm getting an expense by class. So it's summarized everything into, well, it's filtered it based on any transactions that exist within those groups that I have done this filter on. So where I've said filter by, it's only going to pull out transactions for the conferences group. If I change that dimension structure to a different one, so let's say we just chose marketing and said preview that one, we'll get a different result. Okay. But probably the key report that we'd get with our dimension structures is where we're using a dimension-based report. So in this particular report, I've used my dimension report structure. I've also allowed myself to filter by account group on rows, so I can pull out specific account groups underneath my structures. When I go to rows this time, instead of seeing account groups, I'm seeing select dimension structures. Here I've got 2 dimension structures selected, and what I'm doing here is I've set the detail level to show me the leaf amount. So what the leaf amounts is the lowest level that I'm looking at. So in effect, the active level that I'm posting the transactions to. This could be set to show one level down or to show all levels. I'm just going to leave that on leaf amounts. And if I look at that, I'll see now I'm getting my accommodation group with the accommodation class codes that I've got set up, and then the account groups that I've got set up underneath that. So advertising and promotion is an account group, traveling expenses, and so on. Okay. I can change that report easily by changing my dimension structures to say, okay, this time let's take my conferences group, include that, remove the other 2 groups, say okay to that, select my account group, which is, in this case, it's operating expenses. And the detail level, I want to see, that's fine. I can expand this by another dimension. So I could expand this by account group or by one of my other dimensions I've got set up. I'm going to leave that for the moment. I'm just going to go to my formatting, remove the headings, and let's just preview that, see what it looks like. There we go. So I get much the same result, but this time I've just used the one class structure rather than using multiple class structures to get that data out. These are very simple reports that I've set up. So bear in mind that there is a lot more you can do with your reports to make them more useful to you.